Right, so welcome to a presentation called Confessions of a Former UCD Devotee, How I Managed to Kick the UCD Habit and Learn to Love Lean UX. So I think it's always useful to know a little bit about your presenter before I launch into the presentation. So my name's Neil Turner. So I run UX for the masses and write the presentation or write the articles and put up the presentations. I'm a sort of experienced UX professional, currently working in the UK in Cambridge, and I've previously worked both in-house and for sort of digital agencies and UX agencies, and some of the companies I've worked for are shown here. So I'm going to tell you about my story and about, I guess, my UCD sort of story. So my story begins in 1986. So for those of you that remember 1986, it's the year of the infamous Maradona Hand of God. Never a goal. It was the year that Tom Cruise was being dangerous as Maverick in Top Gun, and it was the year that Europe was rocking to the. I'll stop that. That Europe was rocking to the final countdown by Europe. And 1986 was also the year that I suppose an old historical computer now, a year that the ZX Spectrum 2 Plus with a whole 128K of memory. Can you imagine? A whole 128K was released. And the ZX Spectrum 2 Plus just happened to be the first proper computer. I say proper computer. There were, games console type computers in the Turner household, in my household, prior to 1986. But this was firstly the first proper computer that made it into my household, and that I was able to sort of start playing around with, I guess. And I have very fond memories of this computer, of playing games on this computer, of trying to load games and getting 80% of the way through, and then the game not loading because the cassette is corrupted or what have you, and of trying to program very, very basic games using this computer. And I guess this is really where a love affair, between myself and technology and home computing really started. Incidentally, sadly, this isn't said computer. This is a random photo of a ZX Spectrum Plus 2, but it looked very much like this one. And from the ZX Spectrum, I sort of moved up in the world, in sort of eventually onto the heady days of things like Windows PCs. So we see here an example of Windows 3.1. As you can see, Windows 10 has not moved that far off from Windows 3.1. And again, this isn't my old computer. This is just a random photo of a said computer. But again, this is really where I guess my affinity for computers and technology really began, and where the dream started, and I decided, this is fantastic. I love using computers. I want to be a programmer. I mean, look at this guy. Would you not want to be this guy? Pretty awesome. So I, decided, right, I'm going to enroll in a computer science course. I enrolled in a computer science degree at the University of Warwick many years ago, and it was here that I first learnt about, I guess, the field of user experience. The term user experience wasn't really popular then. I'm not sure if the term had really been invented, so to speak. And the term that was more familiar used, and is still used, I guess, in a lot of academia, is human-computer interaction. Sounds a bit odd, human-computer interaction. You sometimes you want to stay a bit clear of those computers. And I've really, first learnt about the field and about things like user-centered design and some of the design principles and usability and importance and that sort of thing. So I did my computer science degree, and I joined the wider world, and I graduated and became a sort of a web developer, putting what I'd learned into practice. Um, and I think very quickly learned two things about web development. One, I learned that it doesn't really matter how well something is coded if the design of what you're building, it isn't good from the offset. If something sucks in terms of the design, it doesn't matter if the coding's fantastic. You know, it's not gonna perform very well. If a website and an application doesn't actually do what users need it to do, and it doesn't work in an intuitive sort of fashion, it doesn't matter how well it's coded, it's going to bomb. And I also learned that I'm a lousy coder, and that actually I'm much better, and I enjoy sort of designing the front end much more than coding it. So I started to learn more about the world of user experience, about usability, and that sort of thing. And I think I found, well, I love technology. I don't really like coding, and I'm not particularly good at coding. But there's this field, I think, where there's a lot of interest that sounds really interesting, that I think I can get into. I'd found my calling. You know, right? I can be a UX Jedi. Check out the awesome Photoshop skills here, or non-Photoshop skills. Clearly, Photoshop is a skill I'm still to master as a UX Jedi. So I decided, right, I want to be designing applications and websites rather than coding them. So I enrolled in a over 10 years ago now, in an HCI, Human Computer Interaction MSc at University College London, and it was here that I first really learnt, I guess, much more in depth about user-centered design, about the importance of really considering the user throughout a design. And if we look at user-centered design, so Wikipedia, the modern fountain of all knowledge, defines user-centered design as a process in which the needs, wants, and limitations of end users of a product, service, or process are given extensive attention at each stage of the design process. So it's really centering that design process around the user. And sometimes I like to think of user-centered design, or I think it can become user-centered design almost as a more of a worshipping, of the mythical user, the center of the design universe. Everything we must do must be around the user. Every decision we make, we must think about the user. What's good for the user, what's best for the user, how do we make something as good as it can be for the user. So I studied hard, and I learned all about the field of user experience, of human computer interaction, the importance of extensive user research within a project, the importance of getting users involved in the design process, of getting feedback at each step of the design process, of always usability testing designs, and getting user testing designs with users, and iterating and making improvements, of getting both qualitative and quantitative data, and the importance of really focusing on the user, that laser beam focus on the user that user-centered design talks about really considering them at every step, every almost every decision. So I you know I spent a year doing my course, and I was ready to fight the good user-centered design crusade, to bring order where there was once chaos, to bring usability where there was once bad design, and to bring joy to users where there was once frustration and misery. I was ready to do my bit. So I started out in the real world as a user experience designer, or sort of information architect, as the title really was then. Sort of putting into practice what I'd learnt, but I think I soon found that the realities of working on real projects was often quite different from the theory. And I'll sort of talk about that a little bit now. So I would carry out user research. I would talk to users. I would find out about users, who they are, what they need to do, what their requirements are, who our users are. I'll create personas, kind of communicating sort of users. I'd try and relay information about users and insights, and what I'd learned, or what the team had learned if I was working with other people. And often I find this research would very rarely get used. It would invariably gather dust somewhere. Someone might read a report, someone might come to a presentation, but really very little would often come out of it. It wouldn't really get utilized as much as I'd hoped it would. I'd get asked to ask the users, whether that's say things like focus groups or user testing, or surveys and what sort of thing. We've got to ask the users. We've got to find out, what do the users want, what's going to work well with users, what are they going to find usable, and that sort of thing. Um, and of course, I'd ask the users, and the users never knew. Users don't have all the answers, and if they did have answers to questions, and invariably, they'd be, very grey, sort of answers which weren't particularly clear cut, or they would, answers which weren't particularly maybe the best decisions. The decisions were not always the best. I think it's fair to say. And when I did have the opportunity to carry out things like user testing with real users, bring them in, whether that's in a lab or whether that's remotely, using something like screen sharing and that sort of thing. Invariably, it was too late to fix anything but the most minor of problems. So, by the time the site of application was in a state where, right, we'll bring in some users, we'll do some testing, it was really too late to change too much. And when I was asked to estimate the amount of time or work that user-centered design that might be required, the kind of UCD work, so whether that's things like user research and design and wireframing and that sort of stuff, was required for a project, I get this kind of reaction from a project manager. I think it's fair to say that a lot of, I guess, clients and project managers were quite surprised at just how much work might be required, or it'd be good to carry out. I'd push for carrying out user research, but be told that timescales and budgets were too tight to do that. I'd push for usability testing and be told that, okay, it's just too expensive and it would take too long. I'd push, I'd put forward a user-centered design and be told that, no, sorry, business requirements are more important. That's not going to meet the business requirements. So clearly I thought, well, others, they're not seeing the light. They can't see that user-centered design is the right path, to a successful product or service. If only other people would see that user-centered design is the right path. If only they'd see the kind of return on investment that it delivers, realize the kind of competitive advantage that user-centered design delivers, they'd see the light. So I thought, maybe I need to do a better job of selling user-centered design. I need to sort of get out there and market it a bit better. So I did my homework. I read some books about how to deal with some of this stuff. I looked at case studies of what other people had done. I spoke to some more sort of experienced people. Okay, what have you done to try and to try and get the message out there, to try and get people bought into a user-centered design process. And I tried to get the word out about user-centered design, about things like the ROI that it can provide. So in this instance, the kind of stock market, even for those companies that are really leaders in customer experience. The kind of high level return on investment. And I even quoted good old Jakob Nielsen, our esteemed Marmite of the Marmite of user experience. spending 10% of a project budget on usability activities doubles usability and that sort of thing. And I even helped to create this awesome video to help explain the user-centered design process, which I'm gonna let you have the privilege of watching. Who couldn't help but be persuaded by this piece of cinematic gold? I mean, does that not make user-centered design seem pretty damn cool? And of course, everyone nodded. On the face of it, user-centered design, sounds fantastic. Design around your users, and you'll get great return on investment. Find out about users and iterate and etc. 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 But even trying to get this message out there, and slowly by surely trying to get more user-centered sort of design activities into projects. It still felt a little bit like I was flogging a dead horse. I saw an awful lot of effort, both my own effort and other people's sort of effort for very little return. A lot of work that never really that wasn't not all of it. There's only a small part of it that was really sort of utilised, and this maybe nagging feeling that a lot of this kind of stuff maybe wasn't all that necessary a lot of the time. Do we need to do this user-centered design for every project? And I think my this well, I'd been learning about a lot of kind of agile and lean thinking, and I think that this I started, or other people have obviously started to apply some of that thinking to user experience, and I think that really rang true with me. It's something that really resonated with me. So um, if we look at, for example, lean and agile, I'm sure they're you know they're they're obviously buzzwords that are still very much in fashion, and it seems that everything is lean, and everything is agile, lean UX, lean startup, lean cuisine, everything, and similarly with agile. So if we look at lean, so lean, lean thinking has come out of really sort of lean manufacturing. So pioneered by something like the Toyota Motor Company, and the goal with lean is really, I guess the primary goal is about avoiding wasted time and effort, because obviously if you can eliminate a lot of waste, you can get things done much more productively and cheaply, and make better use of your resources. And there's also a focus within lean of making things visible. If you can't see something, it's very hard to see how you can improve it if something's not visible, and on continual improvement. And obviously a lot of those principles, it's not just lean. They're not just lean that has those principles. Um, and agile obviously has come out of lightweight sort of software development methodologies such as sort of extreme sort of programming, um, and if you again, it's something which has gained a lot of popularity, and I think it's fair to say that a lot of development is moving towards kind of agile kind of development, and you got this idea of an agile manifesto, which was put together something about 10 years ago, I think, where we value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, and customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. And as this, I think agile sometimes gets a good name and a bad name. It doesn't mean there's no planning, there's no documentation, and you just sort of start coding. But it does mean, and like lean, I think you do things much more, you know, um, trying to be a lot more lightweight. And I think, because I think both of those make a lot of sense when it comes to user experience. Because I think if you think of, or certainly when I think of user-centered design, it sometimes feels like this big, heavy sort of toolkit and set of processes and stuff that's required for a project. It's almost like this massive, great, big, heavy truck where there's a lot going on. It's really meaty, and it makes a lot of sense for really big projects. But is it something that makes sort of sense across the board? And I think with a lot of user-centered design, how much waste is there? How many activities are carried out because they're seen as, well, we need to do this as part of user-centered design, rather than, well, actually, do we need to do this as part of the project? And how many outputs? The personas, the detailed requirements, the detailed wireframes and that sort of thing. How much of that is really required in a project? Because I think there's a lot of scope to cut a lot of that waste out. And I'm always sort of almost reminded of a great sort of quote from Colin Chapman, who's a famous racing car sort of designer and owner, sort of the founder of Lotus. Um, and he said that to make a car go faster, you should simplify, then add lightness. Now, of course, adding lightness is a bit odd. Surely you'd take stuff away to increase, or to make something lighter. But I think it's still something that you know makes sense when applying to something like user-centered design. How can we make user-centered design simpler, and how can we make it lighter, so that what we have is something less like a big heavy truck, and more like a fast, cut down, agile, lean sort of racing car. So I'm gonna talk about. So I obviously use the term sort of lean UX as part of the presentation title. I think lean UX actually, I guess it means something a bit more particular, and certainly there are lots of books and stuff there around lean UX. So I've kind of called it more sort of lean UCD, because I think it covers more than I'm not just going to talk about lean UX, and apologies to anyone that came to the presentation hoping to learn everything there is to learn about lean UX, but I will point you in direction of some good resources towards the end of the presentation. So before I start talking about lean UX, I have a question I'd like to pose to you. Right. Um, I'd like you to know, do you still listen to compact discs, to CDs? So obviously CDs have now very much been eclipsed by MP3s and digital music, which in a lot of sense makes a lot makes a lot of sense, but in other ways it's quite funny, because in terms of sound quality, CDs beat MP3s and Windows Media Audio, or the various other digital formats, kind of hands down. And you'd have thought that listening to music, the sound quality is pretty important. if you look at the amount of sound information that you get on a CD, for example, compared to an MP3, you're looking to an awful lot less. And obviously that's because MP3 compresses a lot of that data down. And I want to see if you can notice the difference between a CD recording and an MP3 recording. So I'm going to play two recordings. One is from a CD recording, the other is an MP3, and I'd like you to try and guess which is which. Okay, so that's number one, and this is recording number two. Right, so do you think number one was the MP3 or the CD, or number two? So which do you think was the CD, which one do you think was the MP3? So, if you said number one was an MP3 and number two was a CD, congratulations, you are correct. And I think that aside from the pleasure of listening to some nice classical music there, I think if you look at the roughly speaking, they sounded pretty much the same. And I think the same is true of user-centered design and something leaner, lean UCD or lean UX, call it what you want. So I think you can take a lot of, take out a lot of what has happened with user-centered design and what supposedly has to happen as part of user-centered design, and still deliver the kind of experience and still deliver the kind of performance that is required for a design or for a product or for a service or what have you. And I think this leads me nice on to my first kind of I think principle of user-centered design, and that is just enough user-centered design over extensive user research, feedback, and design. And what do I mean by this? So I think the user-centered design and user experience has a tendency to really gold plate things, to make things the best they possibly can be, to carry out lots of user research, get lots of user feedback and iterate and lots of rounds of user testing and create this really fantastic, let's create the best user experience we can for our users. And that's fantastic, but a lot of the time something much simpler, something much more stripped back, something more basic, is absolutely, it just is fine. It meets both the user needs and the business goals. There's no need to do a lot of this a lot of this gold plating, and in fact a lot of the time something quick and dirty is okay. I'm not sure I'd advocate this kind of quick and dirty, but sometimes it's important to know when to invest a lot of time and effort in something, and sometimes when you can get away with something a bit more quick and dirty. Right, so I've been talking for about half an hour now, so I'm gonna have a short, hopefully fun little interlude, and what I'd like you to do, it's a tenuous kind of round up to my next point, I guess. I want you to take a look at this clip and see if you can see how many times the white ball passes the ball.
This is a test. How many times does the white team pass the rubber band ball?
Go!
If you answered 13 passes, you are correct. But did you see the black belt gorilla?
Go!
Um, so did you notice the black belt gorilla? So obviously there's lots of clips out there sort of based around this, and this idea that if you're really concentrating on something, you don't necessarily notice other things. Which kind of leads me on to my next point, because I think that sometimes user-centered design it does that. So I think um, there is a tendency to have this laser beam focus on the user, and I think that can be quite dangerous sometimes, because I think it's really important, as it says here, to consider the entire system over solely focusing on users, because as I said, user-centered design it really does focus on the users. It places them at the center of the design universe, and I think that sometimes, as user-centered designers and user experience designers, you can be quite blinkered, and that really laser beam focus means that you kind of don't notice other things and other key sort of parts of a project and that sort of thing, because there's so much stuff going on, that need to be considered for any design project. Whether that's things like sort of business requirements and business goals, other actors within a system. So it might not just be the users. You might have employees or other sort of key sort of actors within a system, and just lots of other stuff going on. And I think only focusing on the users, you don't always factor in a lot of this stuff, and I don't think user-centered design it doesn't always do a great job of considering all this other stuff going on and factoring it in, really. And obviously as part of user-centered design, there's this idea, right? Okay, we'll consider the user and we'll really try and do everything around the user and their needs. But do users even know what's good for them? If we've got this kind of design process centered around users, do users, and we've seen before, we'll ask questions, we'll sort of ask users, and they don't always have the answers, and obviously no UX presentation is complete without a quote from Steve Jobs, and this is a great quote from Steve Jobs. It says, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. And I think, again, this is a danger with user-centered design. It almost expects, okay, we'll put the user-centered design, and they'll give us all the questions. We just have to ask the users. We just have to carry out more user research. We just have to try and involve users as part of the design. And here's what Alan Cooper, who of sort of Cooper sort of design and famous author of The Inmates Are Running the Asylum. This is what he had to say on the matter a number of years ago, which I think is really interesting.
The iterations that I was talking about were perhaps a little spaced a little further apart, where you're actually doing the designing. But as you pointed out, the user doesn't know what they want at the beginning. They get a much better idea of what they want once they see something close to what they think.
Actually, they don't even know then. The thing is that the users don't know. You can't get blood from a stone. Users are not a good source of software. You've got to have software built by experts, and you've got to have software designed by experts. Software is too complicated and too big and too costly and too difficult to let users have anything to do with it.
Okay.
Okay, look. Look. You have kids?
Yeah.
Okay. They go to Kindergarten?
No, actually, they're in high school, middle school.
Okay, but there was a time many years ago when they went to kindergarten. Okay, now in that kindergarten, there were a bunch of people who ran the kindergarten. Okay, now everything those people did was focused on one thing and one thing only. That was the safety, security, and well-being of those 5-year-old kids. Okay, everything they did was for the kids, and they paid deep attention to the kids and what they did and what they wanted. And the one thing they never, ever did was let the kids tell them what to do. Okay? And this is how interaction design has to be done in the world of software, which is we are the experts, we are the grown-ups, and the users are the 5-year-old kids, which means that everything we do is focused on them, and nothing ever lets them in command. They never tell us what to do. So the kids are going, we want ice cream, we want candy. It means two things. No, you don't give them ice cream and candy. But two, it means that you realize that they're hungry and that you need to feed them. So you get the broccoli and the liver.
And you're still hungry.
You see what I'm getting at? Is that's the point. The interaction designers, the number one first thing the interaction designers are going to do is they're going to go to the users. But the one thing they will never do is ask the users for answers. Okay, because the users don't know what those answers are.
Which kind of leads me on to, I guess, my third, I think, sort of key principle, which is to designer-driven design over user-driven design. And what do I mean by designer-driven design over user-driven design? Well, I think that, the design should be driven by design insights, and should be driven by the designer, not by the users. And I sometimes feel that user-centered design is not a particularly helpful title, because it, in a lot of respects, we don't want to center a design around the user, because there's, like I say, there's so much more going on, and users don't really know what's best for them, etc., etc. Which makes me think, why wouldn't we be better off calling UCD user-considered design? We consider the users, but we don't do everything around. We don't put them on this plateau. We don't, center everything we do around them. And surely, absolutely, we consider them at each point, but we don't center it. We don't do everything, absolutely, centered around the users. We need to factor in things like business goals and objectives. We need to think about lots of other stuff and all the other things sort of going on. And sometimes it feels like user-centered design. It almost starts with that premise that the user has the answers, or that we need to really get the users to drive this design. When actually, I think it's it should be the designer sort of driving that design. And I think by doing that, you can cut out a lot of the waste that might be there. In terms of gathering insights and using those insights to design, rather than trying to sort of expect the users to do the design for you, so to speak. So these are these are Neil's copyrighted lean UCD manifesto. So a simpler manifesto than the agile one. So we've got just enough UCD over extensive user research, feedback and design, considering the entire system over solely focusing on users, and designer-driven design over user-driven design. So, and of course, as they say, or at least used to say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. And I wanted to put some of these lean UCDs, or this idea of lean UCD and lean UX, I guess, into practice in a real-world project. Unfortunately, last year I had the opportunity to work on a website redesign, and using a kind of an agile development team. So it was quite it made a lot of sense to use a kind of a lightweight sort of methodology as well, I suppose. It was actually the redesign of a website for a local firm called UVisense. So they manufacture a location-based, or they're a manufacturer of location systems used by some of the world's top automotive manufacturers to track where something is on the production line. And they wanted to redesign they had an old school website, and I wanted something shiny, new, and responsive. So I thought, okay, well, let's try and take a lean UCD approach to this. So instead of carrying out lots of sort of in-depth user research, I ran a number of kind of user research workshops. So working with people within the business that that had first-hand experience with users of of the website and of customers and clients, and tried to get a lot of the information out of them sort of that way. And instead of creating extensive personas and other user requirements, I kind of created sort of sketch personas. So rather than spending a lot of time and effort creating a lot of detail around these personas, they're quite quite high level or something. We had a workshop that's a couple of hours to kind of flesh out these personas and get everyone, so that everyone can get an idea in terms of who the users were and what their kind of requirements and needs would be. And again, rather than creating very detailed requirements documents, kind of again just kind of fleshing out some of the user journeys. And instead of carrying out lots of multiple rounds of user testing, just doing some internal user testing. So, for example, testing out the information architecture of the site, just not with UberSense the company, but with the company where I was working, just kind of internally, so that people that weren't familiar with the current website, instead of creating very detailed designs, using kind of a very lightweight prototype, so a lightweight sort of Exio prototype and style tiles, which kind of show the visual style, but not in a just at quite a high level. And instead of running field trials, so using analytics and remote user testing to track usage and identify sort of problems. And whilst the project had its difficulties, and like any project, I guess, I think the kind of lean UCD approach worked very well. We were able to deliver a good UX design with a lot less of the kind of traditional UCD work that would take place, and was able to cut out a lot of the waste in a sense, I guess, but still deliver something that I think met both the needs of the users and of the business. And obviously, every project is different, and that's not to say that every project makes sense to have a very lightweight, lean approach. But I think that it's very rare that a very in-depth user-centered design approach makes sense for a project. So just to reiterate those principles once again for my patented UCD manifesto. So just enough user-centered design over extensive user research, feedback, and design. Considering the entire system over solely focusing on users, and designer-driven design over user-driven design. If you want to learn more, I can certainly recommend these 3 books. So Lean UX by Jeff Gothelf with Josh Seiden. Agile Experience Design, which talks both about lean and agile, and User Story Mapping by Jeff Patton, which actually covers a lot more than just user story mapping, and again there's a lot of agile and lean thinking in there. So thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. You can find more on the website, my website, uxforthemasses.com, and on SlideShare as well, so slideshare.net/NeilJamesTurner. And here's my Twitter feed for more updates as well.